as I always say with student examples, we need to be respectful. There are some things I think this guy does well, and there's some places where it needs a little bit of love. We're going to talk about both. What you were looking at is one of the body paragraphs that hopefully you all were able to turn in before class. Mainly what we're going to focus on today, we're going to start from a place where I hope we're at least a little bit comfortable, which is evidence, quotations, okay? But we're going to move from that to how's a body paragraph, the whole thing, supposed to work. We've really focused on quotations and analysis. We're going to talk about topic synthesis today. We're going to talk about building the whole thing. And then we're going to move toward the end of class to what does any of this have to do with the entire paper type of thing. I know, it's riveting. I see some of you fading right now. We're going to make it. Maybe. First thing we got to do is you guys need to read it. As you read, this won't take, a couple minutes. It's relatively short. Move the cursor for you. It's in an odd place. As you read, I want you looking for a couple things. Number one, where do you see evidence? Okay. Number two, where do you see analysis of that evidence? Remember, we focused on this last time. It was pretty evident that the author last time thought they were analyzing the evidence when in fact they were just kind of recapitulating, they were kind of summarizing Ansari's ideas. They weren't really working with the evidence. Are we doing that here? And then finally, does that analysis make sense? Do we have more to say? Do we need to explain a little bit better? Anything like that, okay? So again, your three steps, I guess. Where do you see evidence? Do you see any analysis of that evidence? And then finally, judge that analysis. Are we doing a good job? Could it be better? What do you think? Take a couple minutes, read over that, or on your device. We'll talk about it. So, first order of business. Evidence. Do we have any? Is that a hand? I can't tell. What's up? We do have evidence. Where?
The person starts off in the first part where it says...
The very first sentence, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If we're honest with ourselves, we realize that, however bizarre, we actually prefer to be lied to. We got a citation there, quotation marks, although they're a little off, but yeah, generally well formatted. What do you guys think about that quotation? We've talked about this for several classes now. What's worth quoting? What do you guys think? Is this worth quoting? Can we do anything with it?
Yes.
Yeah. Why do you say that? I happen to agree, by the way, but
because we like hearing what we want to hear.
yeah, I mean, again, what I want you guys focused on, and this is why we practice it so much, right, is I understand the idea he's after is a true one, like it's accurate, and potentially worth thinking about. I agree with all that. But our focus is, how does he pose that idea? So we still got to think about language. Ultimately, my question when I ask you, is this worth quoting? Do we have any language that seems interesting, potentially useful, something we can talk about? Do we have any language in this quotation that makes it worth quoting?
Yes, because he talks about that we realize how bizarre he actually prefers to be lied to.
I kind of think I know this. So what you're getting at is, and this is how I would sum it up, usually the kind of language in this quotation wouldn't be much worth quoting, right? One of the tests I give you guys, are you likely to hear this out on the corner next to the bookstore? You stood out there all day. You guys can say all these words, right? All this language is pretty everyday. But in context, some of it is interesting. It is bizarre that we prefer to be lied to. That's a weird thing to point out to people, especially when I think we would all kind of agree with it. So that's worth thinking about. The most interesting element to me is, again, how he puts it. How does he start out? If we're honest with ourselves, Now again, that's a phrase we have, if we're honest with ourselves. Okay. We realize that, however bizarre he's like hedging, we actually prefer to be lied to. He's kind of flipping our expectations. You see that? If we're honest with ourselves, we prefer to be lied to. That's a neat little thing. If we're honest, we lie all the time. Like we would admit we lie all the time. If we're honest, we admit we're dishonest. That's interesting. And we kind of try to talk about that, right? Like we have however many sentences after, maybe 4 or so, where we kind of try to dig into some of that quotation. What did you guys take away from the analysis? We do have it. What did you guys think of it? How's this guy do? Could you sum up the work he does? I'm not saying all of it, any of it. What's he saying about this quotation? You got plenty of time.
At the time, creates a kind of dark atmosphere.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. All right, so look, one issue, these are one of the negatives for this student. Everybody has something to work on. One thing I think this guy has to work on is he's way too fancy for his own good. He's trying way too hard. And I know that immediately when he says things like, hold on, let me find it. Where's it at? It's next to, right here. Whilst. You guys will do this nonsense occasionally? That's what British people say. And I don't believe any of you are British. Like there's American English and British English. We say while. But somewhere along the line, about half of you, this is real, I see it all the time, got fooled into thinking using something like whilst makes you sound like a guy with a monocle, right? You must be kind of top shelf with your word. No, you look foolish. But I point that out because he does stuff like that a lot. Look, what does depraved mean? You might help us out? And if no one can, you all have computers in front of you. That's what your phone is. It's a supercomputer. Do you know your phone is more powerful than the computer they used to go to the moon in the 60s? Yeah. Yeah, you just look at pictures of yourself on it. So,
Morally corrupt.
I cannot hear you.
Morally corrupted.
Morally corrupt. Go back to serial killers for a moment. Often we would say that they're depraved. Hey man, you said Jeff is depraved. What do you mean by that? He likes to eat people, John. Right? That's a depraved sort of behavior. I don't think that's entirely accurate to describe the tone of this quotation. Feels a little strong? I don't even know that it's bleak. I do like that he's thinking about the tone, but again, I kind of think he's just a little too fancy for his own good. What is the tone? What do you guys think? If we're honest with ourselves, we realize that, however bizarre, we actually prefer to be lied to. How does he say that? That's what we mean when we say tone, right? What does he sound like?
That we would rather have a lie than the truth.
That's an idea, dog. What's the tone? Like right now, I'm being, I don't know, pretty straightforward in terms of my tone, right? Sometimes I might try to make a joke. I'm a little more comedic, a little lighter with my tone. What's his tone here? If we're honest with ourselves, we realize that, however bizarre, we actually prefer to be lied to. If you heard a friend say that to you after this class, you go meet them and they say this to you, how do you think they say that? What's their mood like when they say that to you? Do they say it like I just say it? Like I just read it? Or do they say it differently? I saw a couple of you shake your heads. Some of you silent. Few out there. How do they say it? How's it different? Oh, you guys. You beautiful little snow fairies. Alright. If we're honest with ourselves, we realize that, however bizarre, we actually prefer to be lied to. Is that a little closer? What is that? That's different from how I just said it, isn't it? What is that tone? What's the mood, do you think? Does he sound happy?
Sound a little disappointed.
Okay. Why do you say that?
But what you just said that time sound like you was
Disappointed in what or whom?
that we
Who?
like that we would rather be told lies. than
Yeah.
tell the truth.
So he's disappointed in the reader? That's not like who's the target for his disappointment, right? When your parents say they're disappointed, they mean you. You?
The generation, yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? This is important. I stress this for a reason. Because look, an overall tone. Ooh. Right? That's what you're saying? Now the issue with that, potentially, how do you feel when someone says they're disappointed in you? When it's your parents, how do you normally feel?
That's not a good thing.
Do what?
That's not a good thing.
You don't feel good about you, right? You let your parents down. But how do you feel if a stranger says they're disappointed in you? Like at best you don't care. At worst you're like, well, fuck you. I don't need you. Right? I don't think if he is disappointed, and maybe he is, I don't think he's just disappointed with the current generation. This is what's important here. We got to get as specific as we can. Who else is he including in that statement?
Everybody.
Who's everybody?
Could it be himself too?
Yes. Yes. Right? And it's there, right? I'm not making that up. That's there. When a person says something like that, they're not talking about everybody but themselves, right? And this is important because now we sidestep that issue. I think I saw Curtis when I said, like, the strangers is what you was wearing. Exactly. But we're not having that issue because he's part of it. He's including himself in his kind of general disappointment, right? He's right next to you. Importantly, how does that change it potentially? That he's including himself. He's disappointed in you guys, but he's also disappointed in me. He's also disappointed in himself for this. How might that change it? How do you react to his tone now that he's including everyone in that, including himself? You're not shrugging now, at least, right? It's a positive step. Does this make you more likely to agree with his idea, disagree, ask certain questions? What does this do to you as a reader to have him say he's disappointed in you in the same way he's disappointed in himself? Are you more likely to listen to him, or are you less likely?
So people, I would say they were less likely to see him because in their minds, they're probably thinking like, how do you know that we're pointing ourselves to?
I mean, I guess, although my counterpoint to that would be, didn't we all say to begin with, we all pretty much agree with this? If you say a thing that everyone agrees with, and you include yourself in it, like I just, there are devil's advocates everywhere. Like there are people that disagree just to disagree. I'm not going to fault you for that. But generally, what's the reaction? If I say, in all honesty, I think we, especially in relationships, that's what he's talking about. We usually prefer to be lied to, right? We prefer to be let down, easy. We don't want it straightforward. Oh, you don't want to go out with me again because I have awful breath. Yeah, I didn't need that. I didn't need to hear that. I don't want that honesty. But we say he's disappointed in us and himself for that fact. We're treating it as a fact. What does that do to how you read the rest of that paragraph? Not maybe the whole book. How does that affect your relationship with the author as a reader? And the rest is silence. Okay. That's not my line, by the way. You can look it up later. Don't worry about it. Which, not 9. Maybe you're stumped sometimes. That's what you're after, though. I'm not going to fill it in for you. But that's what we're after. After this, when he says the phrase, now we're focused on the quotation, right? If we're honest with ourselves, this implies there is something these people tend to not want to believe or neglect. I don't know what that's enough, right? Okay. There's negative connotations that can always sprout from honesty. I'm not clear on what he means, but that's okay. He also expresses how we as people share this duality, fancy, of both wanting honesty and lies. What do you guys think he means by that? We need to define that better. You guys might not be super familiar with this word, but wanting honesty and lies, I think we can parse. What's he talking about? We need at least another sentence explaining what that means.
You mean make it sound good? Like you telling a lie.
Well, this is about what we want from other people, right? Because Ansari's big idea is we say we want honesty, when in fact, all his research points to the contrary, right? And again, at the very top of this discussion, we all generally agree with that idea. It's like, well, yeah, but then, yeah, no. I don't actually want all that honesty. I'm not ready for that. Okay? He's pointing to that fact. He's saying, this is what we're talking about. This is interesting that we, in a way, kind of want both. But he's not quite saying what's interesting about that. What is interesting about that? I think we can do that. What does it say about us? That we apparently want honesty, but we also actually kind of don't.
I would say we don't know how much honesty we want in this situation.
Okay, push on that a little bit. I agree with that.
Just say we want their honest opinion, but like shallowly.
Yeah.
Situation is.
Yeah. Well, we want their honest opinion slanted. Like we maybe the best among us. We want honesty, but like you don't have to be super blunt. You could sprinkle some sugar on it or something, right? Like kind of. And that's not honesty. Okay, good. What does this mean then? I can't. Will you just please? Sure. But generally speaking, I think most people are, right? So we know that. What we're trying to get to is what is Ansari helping us think about when it comes to our relationship with the truth? That's what we're talking about here. Part of what we're getting at, I might try to write that down, is like, can you try to say that one more time, what you said?
We just want like the truth, but like shallow, not
We can only handle so much of the truth, I think is what we're getting at, right? We want it, but like not all of it.
Like we don't want to actually hear what you're actually thinking about too much.
Why? This is the important part. we're at the point now where and this can be difficult.
Because we don't want you to hurt our ability, like, our emotions.
And that's what you were saying, but we built into it. You see what I'm saying? You don't ever want to just say, well, we're sensitive. It's like, well, how did we get from I'm sorry to this idea? And I think we do it through the motivation. We're worried about the fact that we're sensitive, maybe. You see what I'm saying? That's a little difference, but it's important. So, like, we can only handle so much of the truth because ultimately we're most worried about our own fragile selves. Honesty is something that we, from a very young age, are encouraged. I don't, again, he's a little strong with his language, but we'll just leave it. With these in mind, turning the idea on their head, but forcing the idea that we can't handle dishing out. That's fair. We want honesty from other people, blame for feelings or act. To sever any kind of blame. What does he mean? I think I know what he means, but he's talking like a robot here. What's he talking about? We don't want honesty, and we maybe even don't want to be honest with each other because we want to sever any kind of blame for our feelings or actions. What's he getting at? Do you guys have a sense of that? By the way, this is what happens to me when I read your words when you write like a robot. I have to stop and go, what? This is my way of telling you, just write like a human being. Don't be crazy. But anyway, what's this thing about blame? What are we trying to get at here at the end? This might be important. Who's being blamed and for what? He says being blamed for your feelings. The hell does that mean? Who's going to blame you for your feelings?
Kind of blaming yourself.
Do what?
Kind of blaming yourself.
You say he's blaming himself?
Well, like yourself.
What do you mean by that?
He said our feelings, but your feelings depend on you.
Yeah, but he's saying somehow being untruthful severs you from this blame, like allows you to not be blamed for your feelings. So that implies to me that somebody else is blaming you. I guess when you're honest, right? When you're honest with someone about your feelings, I suppose if those feelings are not entirely positive, might that person blame you for those feelings? And if so, how? What are we talking about? No one ever gets upset with you for the way that you feel?
Yeah.
Sure. Like who? Especially if we're talking about honesty, like being honest. Do you ever lie a little bit? So maybe you don't have to deal with certain things? What are we talking about? I see some of you nodding, like you kind of on the same page. What are we talking about? When do you lie a little bit? When do you sprinkle some of that sugar? Just to maybe soften it. Whatever this it is.
You're trying to figure out how you're supposed to feel about that certain thing.
Yeah, what is that thing? I'm just looking for an example. Something we can hang on to. A lot of you are acting like you know what I'm talking about, but you're just very quiet. When do you lie a little bit? When are you honest but not completely honest with somebody?
Trying to get out of the phone.
When you don't like someone, what'd you say?
Trying to get out of the phone with somebody.
This kind of come from the same place, maybe? Sure. Okay. When you're trying to get rid of somebody in some kind of context, right? The context can vary, but it always comes back to I've had enough of you, and I can't say that, because that would be too honest. Why can't you say that? Why would that be too honest? To say, hey man, I cannot hear your voice anymore. I'm sorry. Later. Do what? You hurt their feelings. And that's part of it. And I think the good among us would be concerned with that. This guy's talking about blame. I think he's trying to get at something else. Why else don't you say that to people?
Because afterwards you kind of blame yourself for saying that.
You get upset with yourself
Yeah.
for what?
For saying that to that person.
Yeah, but why would you be upset with yourself? You're being honest. Why would you be upset with yourself for that?
You gotta deal
Because
with
you're
how they react.
Here and then here. What?
You gotta deal with how they react.
Ah. We'll put in that for 1 second. What'd you say, dude?
Because you're mad at yourself for saying that who's ready to go and the person failed.
Okay, and that's the nice thing we had before, right? So there's two distinct possibilities here, and they can exist together. Number one is, and again, this is us at the end of their paragraph trying to sort out what they've packed into this one sentence. This is not on the page, but I think this is what they're getting at. The trouble is, it is not on the page. We prefer to be lied to. Moreover, we prefer to lie to others, not otters. Just lying to otters all day. Lie to others when the truth is simply too much. We do this to save this other person's feelings, right? That's the nice thing. But we also do this so that we don't have to deal with that other person's feelings. Isn't that pretty true? And it sounds pretty awful when you're honest about it like that. You sound a little bit like a sociopath. I don't want to deal with other people's feelings. Okay, so what we've done. Look, he wants to talk about realizing bizarre. You're not going to bring up new stuff in the last sentence. We're just not doing that. All right? Maybe he had more to say. It ain't here. We got enough. If I was working on this paragraph, right? If I was a student, I'd probably want to solve this. We're not going to do that today. You guys taught me enough. We're not going to do that. We waded through our thoughts on this. We had some good thoughts, and we ended up here. This was our closing sort of ultimate thought. And it took thinking through the quotation for that long to get here, okay? Now, what I'm about to tell you is important. Like, write it down, okay? 95% of the time. Oh, now the pen's coming out. Okay. 95% of the time, if you guys have a legit argument, this is a legit argument, right? You're only going to get there two ways. Number one, you have to think on the page. I keep saying it takes writing your way to it. All the stuff we just did, it took all that, okay, to get to this. And number two, what that means is it's almost always going to be at the end of your body paragraph somewhere. It won't necessarily be the last sentence. For us, it was actually the second to last, but I deleted that last sentence because we didn't need it, right? But it is almost always, if you have one, going to be near the bottom of the paragraph. And part of what we're doing today is trying to train you up a little bit to help you look for it, right? This is jumping ahead a little bit, but what we are arguing in this paper, understand it like this. Ansari makes arguments throughout the book, right? He makes arguments throughout the book, all kinds of interesting points. You may agree with him, disagree, but he makes points all over the place. What our job is to think about how he makes those points. The best verb I could come up with was diagram. You guys know what a diagram is? Well, your argument is diagramming his argument. So if you started a paragraph with Ansari talks about how we're not as honest as we think we are, right? That's basically where we start in this paragraph. He does do that. He says that. That's a book report. That's summary, okay? We're going to talk about that. But if you get to an idea, and you can do it, it takes some work on the page, but you get to this idea that saying that, said that, implies that we don't like being super honest because it's just more convenient, right? You just have an easier day if you occasionally lie to people a little bit, right? That makes it sound pretty selfish on the one hand, right? He doesn't come out and say that though. What you are doing now is talking about how he implies this argument, how he makes this argument sort of form in your brain without actually saying it. That's something you have to prove, okay? That's what we're trying to do in this paper. And it's going to look like that. If you do your job, it's going to look like that pretty much every time. 95% of the time. The other 5% is when you just get crazy lucky and you just have a body paragraph. That'll happen. But it's pretty unlikely. Questions about any of that? Okay. Next thing we're going to do. I promised we talk about topic sentences. I know you guys are excited. Let's do that real quick. Let me turn this off. And let's see. Off. Sweet. All right. So the 3 I's. We don't have to worry about them right now. But what they pertain to, right? We've talked about evidence and analysis a lot. Those are the last 2. The first one, topic sentences. You can actually break that into 3 parts as well. And by the way, for this little exercise we're about to do, you're probably going to need what we were just looking at. So I would look at it on your phone if you can. The way sentences work. In English. I don't know all the other languages. I know a lot of them work this way, but I can't pretend all of them do. But the way English sentences work, you need a subject, and you need that subject performing an action. That is all you need. Okay? The shortest sentence in the Bible, Jesus wept. You have a subject, and that subject is doing something. That is a sentence. That is all you need. Okay? Now they can get way more complicated than that. They get other parts. But you got to have those, or you don't have a sentence. And so this first part is no different. I write it like this. You need a who and a what. This is your subject, and this is what your subject is doing. The other way to think about these 2 parts. This is what you're pointing at in the text. Okay? So a lot of the time in this paper, this who is going to be who? Probably. I thought that was a pretty easy question, personally.
Exactly.
Who's your subject going to be a lot of the time in this paper?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. He wrote the book. He's who we're talking about. Not always. It depends. Usually it's going to be him and something he does. Right? So before we get to the next part, what are we looking at in this paragraph? What are we pointing to in the book and saying, this thing Ansari did? This is the book report part, right? This is summary. What are we talking about here? Can somebody try to sum it up for us?
There's a lot of things that Asari says that we need to think about.
I barely heard what you said.
I said there's a lot of things that Ansari says that things that we need, phrases that we need to think about.
Yes. All right. Quick timeout. I say this with respect. I do. But this is how drafting works. If you come at me with, Ansari says a lot of things we need to think about, I'm going to come back at you with, yeah, he's got about a book full of them, right? We have to get more specific, and this is how drafting works. So if you were to write that down in your paper, a thought very soon after should be, oh, but what phrase are we talking about here? Like, what specific thing out of all these things are we pointing at? But that's a good start. What are we talking about? I'll read the quotation again for you. If we're honest with ourselves, we realize that, however bizarre, we actually prefer to be lied to. How would you summarize that idea to a buddy? Oh man, I read this crazy thing in this book for class, and It's true. And he'd be like, well, what's that thing? You wouldn't come at him with, oh man, he's got a bunch of phrases that we need. No, you would be able, like, how would we sum that up to one of your friends? That idea.
How much we can handle the truth? With how much we can handle the truth?
Say it with your chest, please.
How much we can handle the truth?
Okay, how much can we? We can get you're much more specific now, but just a little more. How much truth can we handle? What's our relationship with the truth? That's what we're talking about.
Right.
This is us talking about the evidence we're gonna analyze, right? If we're honest with ourselves, we realize that, however bizarre, we actually prefer to be lied to. Ansari is saying something about our relationship to the truth. What's he saying? You say we love the truth, we can't get enough. What? Somebody started to say something.
We really don't want to hear the truth. We want to be like lied to a little.
A little. And that's important. Because he also kind of implied we don't want to be lied to like completely. That would be chaos. If everyone just lied all the time. Hey man, you gonna pick me up? Yeah, I'll be there. Where were you? Dude, I lied to you always. Like, life wouldn't work, right? Good. I almost grabbed my pen. I'm very upset, whoever comes after me. So, something to, and again, this is drafting. This might change as you write your paragraph, right? But for right now, we're just pointing to something in the book. Ansari acknowledges prefers to be lied to a little. Okay? Now, like I said at the start, if this is all you gave me, and then you gave me that quotation immediately afterward, I would agree. Because that is what the quotation says, right? This is book report. You need this, but you cannot stop here, okay? Now the third part is the most important. It's how or why. How does this fit into your larger argument? Why does this matter? Why are you telling me this? What are you going to convince me of, right? These two things come from the book, right? You see it right here. This is in the book. This last part comes from you, okay? That's how it's your argument. You have to convince me because it comes from here, right? This is where your grade is won and lost. So I'll tell you right now, even if it's a bad argument, and I don't want you to do that, but you got to try. You got to try to do this part. If you don't, you're just telling me what Ansari does. And I'm like, I know that. I read too, you know. But because of that, this can be the harder part. It comes from up here. Words are hard. We took like half an hour figuring out that paragraph, right? Same deal here. So to take us back to that paragraph, I told you 95% of the time, if you have an argument, you're going to have to work to it, which means it's going to come at the end of your body paragraph, right? We did that here. Our argument that we got to, we're talking about being blamed for feelings. The first bit, the nice bit, was that we're worried about other people. Okay. Yeah, you should do that. You should be worried about each other. Be good to each other. Okay. But then I would argue the more interesting idea, one that we're not super used to and one that I would imagine might make us a little uncomfortable, is not that we just want to save the other person's feelings, but we also want to save, we basically want to save ourselves from the other person's feelings. We don't, you said, I believe, we don't want to have to deal with it. Just that phrase even, which again, I think is accurate. You don't have to deal with it. You don't want to have to expend the energy with oh, I made you sad. God, oh, this is like an hour now. I'm going to have to, right? That's true. But that's our argument. And sorry acknowledges the fact that everyone prefers to be lied to a little. And we're going to argue now because why? How do we try to sum up that idea that we arrived at? We have most of the sentence. I just need the because from somebody. Everyone prefers to be lied to a little because why? It's that not wanting to have to deal with a business. We gotta figure out how to put that in this sentence.
Because feelings are a lot to handle.
Okay, let's start there. And again, much like we kind of shit on you earlier, but now I'm shitting on you, so it's equal opportunity. That's a start. Can anyone help me with the problem? Can you say it with your chest as well?
That feelings are a lot to handle.
Feelings are a lot to handle. Everybody agree with that? Yes. We know that. That's a little banal, right? But that means we just need to get more specific. To this. What are we getting at? Right? Feelings are a lot to handle. That's not what we said at the end of the paragraph. We're more specific than that.
We don't want to deal with feelings.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out. Worst case scenario, do that, which is you just kind of say it again, right? But we want to try to phrase it differently, right? I don't want you guys repeating yourselves over and over if you can help it. How do we put that another way? Everyone prefers to be lied to a little because we just don't want to deal with sort of the emotional fallout from people, right? What we're basically looking for at this point is another way to say deal with. I've given you several unintentionally. I don't know how much attention you guys pay. What are we talking about? What's the issue with having to deal with another person's emotions? Why does that matter to us?
Consequence.
What's up?
The consequence.
I still can't hear you.
The consequence.
Yes. What are they though? For us. That's what we're talking about. What are those consequences ultimately?
Blaming ourselves for hurting others' feelings.
Okay. So, and we sort of talk about that at the end, like on the one hand, it's maybe beating yourself up a little bit for like hurting that person, which is possible. I don't know that that's deal with it though. That to me sounds like having to deal with something. That's like if you have a puppy and you come home and they're not housebroken yet, right? You got to deal with the mess. Maybe you're a little upset with yourself for not like walking him earlier, but I don't deal with it as something else. What are we talking about when we say we got to deal with something? My 3-year-old bit my 5-year-old the other day. I had to deal with that shit. You know what I'm saying? I wasn't upset with me at all. Although it's probably partially my fault. I was trying to eat dinner. But I had to get up. I had to deal with it. What are we talking about? Because I think that phrase is accurate. Huh?
Handle?
Yes. But again, connotation. You say you have to handle something. Oh man, after this class, I got my break. I got a lot of stuff I got to handle. A bunch of emails. I got to figure this video out. I got to handle some things. You say you got to deal with something. That's got a little more stank on it. We agree? Yeah. So what are we talking about? We have to deal with a thing. What does that mean for you? Why does it bother you more to say you have to deal with something as opposed to handle something? Do you think?
Because when you say you have to deal with something, it's making it seem like it's forced, I guess.
Good. Good. It's not up to you. Which again implies if it were, you wouldn't be doing it. Right? If you get home and your puppy has pissed everywhere, you kind of have to deal with that. Otherwise, you live in filth. Yeah. Okay. everyone prefers to be lied to a little because the alternative emotional. Oh my goodness. Everyone's busy. Everyone's got things going on. Because the alternative will be a world filled with emotional responsibilities. Isn't that what we're talking about? You say you have to deal with something, you're forced to deal with something. It's a responsibility now you have to that person. You upset them. Hey man, I know you want to be friends with me. I had to do this a couple times in my life. If you haven't, you will. Hey man, I know we've been like kind of friends or whatever. That was mostly because we rode the bus together. I don't like you. You're not for me. What happens then? What are you, man? I'm cool. It's like, no, you're not, dog. You have to deal with that. That's a responsibility you have now, right? And we're saying that we don't want that. I mean, we're saying that Ansari is saying that, right? That's our argument. Cool. And I know we can talk about it because we just did. To sum all that up, because we got to move on real quick. We did not start with a topic sentence. Some of you hopefully have noticed at this stage. If you go back to that paragraph, we start with our evidence. That's fine. That's how I do it. That's probably why I teach it that way. But I keep telling you in different ways, you do not really know what you want to say. None of us do. You have an idea, but it's pretty nebulous, pretty like not formed. We're all like that. But you go to evidence that you like, and you talk about it a lot. And you edit, you delete some stuff, you add some stuff, you get more specific, you figure it out. And by the end of that paragraph, if you do your job like we did as a class, you end up with an argument. Then the trick is, get it to the top in a topic sentence, okay? You do these two things first, not just, in this case, what Ansari has done, but specifically, when looking at our quotation, what he's done, okay? Very specific. And then, get your argument in there, which we did. That's a complete, once you add this to that paragraph, that's a complete body paragraph. Still needs some love, but generally speaking, really fucking solid, if I'm being honest with you. Questions about any of that? I assume not, but. Okay. In the briefest of nods to an outline, because we are running short on time. And also because I assume, like all of you, I hate outlines, but they are useful. There's actually two ways to do them. Number one is the way that you guys are familiar with, which is what we're kind of going to talk about right now. And that's what you do when you set out to write a paper, right? You guys have probably been trained to do this before you start writing at all, right? My first paragraph is going to be about this. My second paragraph is going to be about this. You go through. We're all used to that. The issue with that approach is, as I keep saying, you don't know what you want to really say. So how useful is that outline, especially right at the start?
Not so useful.
No, at best. At worst, it's going to trick you into thinking you're accomplishing more than you are. It's going to be a trap. What I'm going to tell you is this. I learned through writing more papers, more pages than you can fathom. I don't believe any of you are English majors, so it's unlikely you will have to write as much as I did. And then I wrote for fun on top of that. How weird is that? What I discovered is, you're writing like a 20-page paper. I know, right? Around page 12, the fog kind of sets in. You're like, what am I even talking about? You lose the thread. You can't hang on to all that in your head. This is where an outline can help you. How does that apply to you with your 2-page paper, you might ask? We have a paragraph now. We have a body paragraph. Our argument is this. Because the alternative would be a world filled with emotional responsibilities. The implication being, we don't want to deal with those emotional responsibilities. Okay. Where do we go from there? You need something that relates to that, right? This can be a difficult question, but to sum one thing up real quick. When I outline, I would have my topic sentence, I would have my evidence, and I would have some kind of summary of my analysis. This, by the way, is the 3 I's. But anyway, I would get that on a page to help me if I felt lost. Just to think about, what am I going to move to? What comes after that? This can be hard too. Now, you got to go to your notes. Or if you don't take notes, and I keep saying this, take notes. You got to go to the whole book and just be like, what if I don't. We need something that relates to this idea. And I will ask you here briefly, what are we really talking about? The alternative would be a world filled with emotional responsibilities. We don't want to deal with, we keep saying, the sort of emotional fallout, right? Of being honest with somebody. Because of how it would affect us. That's ultimately what we came to. Yes, on the one hand, you're worried about that other person. You want to be nice. But we're kind of saying that Ansari is kind of saying, if we admit it, if we're honest with ourselves, that a lot of that is actually due to the fact that we're worried about us. We have a word for that. You're ultimately worried about yourself. What's kind of selfish, aren't we? And it has a negative connotation. An evolutionary biologist would suggest that that's why you're here at all, because you got to worry about number one. But as a society, we kind of stood back and said, well, that sounds a little selfish, sounds a little mean. But that's interesting, because at different points in the book, I would argue, if I were writing this paper, he kind of talks about this idea of being selfish, right? And I know the book very well. I have unbelievable amount of notes. So I went and looked to prepare for this class, right? Because I knew we would end up here. This is maybe my favorite quotation on selfishness in the book. Maybe. It's on page 24. I would like you to see it because it's something you got to see. If you're using an e-copy, you could search for the phrase, the soulmate marriage. Soulmate, they put a space in between soul and mate. I've always seen it the other way, but anyway. Page 24, we're on the bottom half of the page. The phrase I'm actually talking about is bolded. You can find it very easily. Now, the tricky part here, well, I'll read this for you real quick. The soulmate marriage is very different from the companionate marriage. So we're talking about how our relationships are different now from how they used to be, right? That's our context. It's not about finding someone decent to start a family with. It's about finding the perfect person whom you truly deeply love, someone you want to share the rest of your life with, someone with whom, when you smell a certain t-shirt they own, you are instantly whisked to a happy memory about the time he or she made you breakfast and you both stayed in and binge-watched all 8 seasons of Perfect Strangers. Now there's a little bit, maybe of a joke in there, and maybe we could quote that, but I'm telling you, there's something way more interesting going on in this entire paragraph. We keep talking about quotations. I would have to paraphrase this because I want this entire paragraph, and I cannot quote the whole thing. And this is a stupid pop quiz moment, and I apologize. Does anything stand out to anybody in this paragraph? He keeps repeating something. One kind of word in particular. He repeats it, I counted. What's up?
Someone?
Huh?
Someone?
No. Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He repeats this word 7 times in this paragraph. It's not a long paragraph. 7 times is a lot.
Perfect.
You might say that twice. Did somebody say it? Somebody murmured. Maybe there was a hiccup. He says this word 7 times. in like this much space? You. We're talking about soulmate marriage. We start with, it's not about finding someone decent to start a family with. That's companionate. That's how it used to be. How is it now? Perfect person whom you love. Someone you want to share the rest of your life with. When you smell a t-shirt, you are whisked away. They made you breakfast. You both stayed. That is a lot of you in that paragraph. Right? It's kind of weird. That meets the bar for our evidence, right? It's worth thinking about. Now, I bring it to your attention because I'm on this wavelength. If we're going to do this in a paragraph, I think the next one has got to in some way tie into this larger theme of selfishness, right? Because that's ultimately what we're talking about here. So I'm going to ask you, what's this paragraph maybe got to do with selfishness, do you think? All these yous. What's the context again? What are we talking about in this paragraph? The difference between something.
Difference between how you feel and how the other person feels.
No, but I appreciate the shot. It's the first sentence. He tells us. It's bolded for you. You don't even have to find it.
Soulmate marriage and companionate marriage.
Good. And again, that's how it used to be back in the day, right? Companionate marriage. He spends pages talking about it. He's like, all right, that's how things were. Here's how things are now. This is how they're different. And I'm going to give you 7 U's to form that definition. Is there a way to think about selfishness with all those U's? What might he be implying without saying it? He does not say this. But if it takes 7 U's to make the definition of a soulmate marriage, what might he be implying is most important when it comes to that kind of relationship? That's such low-hanging fruit. This really bums me out.
Yourself.
Would you chest, please?
Yourself.
Yeah. That was moderately with your chest, but that's okay. You. And again, this is just an idea. I would have to write the paragraph. I would have to think it out. I may arrive at something kind of different. But if I'm moving on to the next one with my outline now, right? Where do I start? Like we always do. My evidence. I'm going to find a way to paraphrase this entire paragraph. Specifically, I want to point out the 7 U's. That's a lot. My argument right now, to start, is really a question. It just raises the question for me, right? Is he implying, because he's defining what a soulmate marriage is in this paragraph, is he implying, with all those U's, what's ultimately important in a soulmate marriage versus companionate? It's all about me. What I think of the other person. How they make me feel. He says this, right? But what he does not say is this. You got to think about that on the page, just like we did, right? And if you do your job, you work at it enough, you're going to answer that question. And you're going to take that, you're going to make that topic sentence. And holy hell, you're going to have another body paragraph. And it's going to be related to this other one. Isn't that wild? That's how you use outlines. That's the real way to do it. Okay? If you want to start with one, if that helps you organize your thoughts, do it. But you cannot be married to that guy to begin with. It will not work. Okay? There's another way to use them, and we might do that later, but this is how you build papers. You look at what you have, and you do your best to figure out where you can go from there. Okay? When it comes to a thesis, I know we're almost out of time. I just want to touch on this. We're going to talk about introductions and thesis statements next time. When it comes to a thesis, I said this already, but I want to underscore it for you. What we did today in terms of argument, we're focused on very specific elements in Ansari, right? This body paragraph only had one quotation. This second body paragraph is going to have a paraphrase, but we're probably only going to talk about that for the entire time, right? Those are very specific. A thesis, well, that's your whole paper, right? You're going to need, I would recommend, after you write this body paragraph, go write that one, maybe write one more. See what you have. And then you have to try to sum all that up. What are we getting at ultimately once we have all those paragraphs in front of us, right? So we can't answer that question today. It seems like right now we're kind of driving at this, but that could change, right? We don't know yet. That's what your thesis would probably do, but we don't know. The way to sum all that up, and this is the thing I said before, but I want to underscore its importance. Ansari makes arguments. You are making arguments about how he makes his arguments, okay? I don't want anyone to give me a thesis, something like, in modern romance, Ansari outlines all the ways that we're different from how people used to be when they look for relationships. Somebody's going to give me that. What's the problem with that thesis statement? If you guys can't see the problem with that thesis statement, you're going to break my heart. I'll give it to you again. In modern romance, Ansari outlines all the ways that relationships now are different from how they used to be, back in the 60s or whatever. What's the problem with that thesis statement?
Because you're not making an argument, you're stating.
Good. Why? Well, it's not an opinion. What is that? It's not an argument either. What is that sentence? What are we doing?
It's just a statement.
Yeah. It's a summary. Ansari does do that. And it is an argument, but it's his argument. Do you see what I'm telling you? This is another weird trap you guys can fall into sometimes. You think you're making an argument because you're parroting Ansari's argument. But that's summary. He does do that. What you would have to do, if that's something you focused on, first, I would do this work, okay? To think about how he makes those arguments, and then come back and say, well, ultimately, what was he maybe getting at? Outlining those differences, right? For this particular student, I think it's probably something to do with this. But you may be different. It depends on what you find, right? What you end up talking about. Any questions whatsoever? Oof, all right. Bunch of Olympians at the quiet game. All right, for next time, I want you on course 10 to try to turn in a couple thesis statements. Now, everything I've just told you in this class would suggest that you should not do that work in a vacuum, right? Ideally, you have something along these lines already, because that was your homework for today. Now, most of you, I've looked at a couple, most of you will need to do more work. Go do it, man. Nothing is stopping you. I know it's not a sign for next time, but you are going to have to write me a paper. Work on what you got. And hey, if you do that, maybe you think of another paragraph. Go do that guy too. Nothing's stopping you. Nothing's stopping you. Go do it. After you do some of that, then maybe try to come up with a couple thesis statements, right? All of this work, I had a couple people asking me like what we're doing it for or what I want you to do. We're writing the paper. I didn't know, I'm not trying to trick you guys. This is all to help the future you. If I didn't assign you parts along the way, you would just wait till the night before. Some of you are still gonna wait till the night before, which is a bad idea. But this is the paper. That's what this is, right? We're just making it easier on you. So treat it like that. Anyway, thesis statements due next time. I think we're done reading, I'm sorry if I'm not mistaken. You're free to read more if you like. He's pretty enjoyable. That's pretty much it. I'll see you guys Wednesday. Thank you.